Jerry's wife Shelley had been keeping a secret from him. She was pregnant. Jerry found out and was furious. He decided to get revenge. He went to the house without making any noise. He went through the back and opened the basement door. He couldn't use the front entrance because Shelley had installed an alarm system. Jerry didn't understand why she wanted the alarm system, but he installed it anyway. He opened the garage. The door would have set off the alarm too. Toshi had asked Jerry to set the delay on the push-button panel to 10 seconds. She thought 45 seconds was too long. A burglar could be in my bedroom before it goes off. She had joked. You just want to give your boyfriend time to sneak out the window. Jerry had teased. Shelley laughed and continued cooking dinner. It made sense, so he adjusted the delay. This meant he also triggered the alarm every time he came home. It was only for a few seconds until he could enter the 4-digit code. The digit code is tested daily to ensure it's working. Shelley commented cheerfully one afternoon as Jerry grumbled after setting it off about 24 times. The windows were all wired too, but Jerry knew no one would notice the wire he had installed over the door frame downstairs, bypassing the sensor. Shelley rarely went into the basement, and even if she did, Jerry doubted she would notice when he tested it. The panel lit up perfectly, showing all of the loops were secure. The door opened silently thanks to the oiled hinges, and Jerry had taken care of the steps too, nailing each one securely. A week earlier, Shelley had been nagging him for months to fix the loose steps, so he was pleased with that. Testing them with his 220 pounds weight, he grinned to himself. They didn't make a sound in the windbreaker hanging from hooks at the top of the stairs. He had a little tool. It felt satisfying to reach into the pocket and find it. Jerry left it right where he'd found it. He wasn't planning on shooting anyone, unless he had no other choice. He also had no intention of backing down. He had a feeling something was going on, and he was determined to uncover the truth. He'd confront his wife Shelley if she was hiding something. She'd either deny it or admit it. If she wasn't, he'd think she was being foolish. 3 years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive troubled him deeply. He even visited a fertility specialist. The doctor joked with Jerry, telling him to avoid any close contact with other women, even if they were fully clothed, because he was extremely fertile. The doctor laughed at his own joke, gave Jerry a friendly pat on the shoulder, and suggested he should make good use of his fertility instead of following the doctor's advice. Shelley saw her own doctor, the same one she'd been seeing since before they got married. She was adamant about that too. One day, Jerry coincidentally saw her leaving the hair salon. It was just by chance, or else he might not have become suspicious at all. She was getting her hair and nails done. However, Jerry was already running late for a job bid. He didn't dwell on it until he was pulled into his garage just a month ago. She had broken the news to him with a sad expression, saying she might possibly have kids, but it was doubtful. She left the hair salon. It was just by chance, or he might not have become suspicious at all. It seemed strange. She was supposed to be at her doctor's appointment, but there she was getting her hair and nails done. However, Jerry was already running late for a job bid. He didn't dwell on it until he was pulled into his garage just a month ago. She had broken the news to him with a sad expression, saying she might possibly have kids, but it was doubtful. She even shed a few tears. He comforted her until she regained her composure, feeling a little worried himself. "We just keep trying, honey," she reassured him, but her tone didn't quite convince him. That's when Jerry started paying closer attention. He couldn't believe that the woman at the hair salon was qualified to advise Shelley on such matters. Cheating? No way. Shelley was always at home without a hint of anything suspicious. She was always there when he returned. He did have to go on overnight trips 2 or 3 times a month, but that seemed unlikely. She seemed healthy and robust, maybe even a little overweight. He wondered if she was visiting the Indian casinos, but a quick check of their finances showed nothing unusual. In fact, Shelley was quite frugal. The only things she spent money on were clothes and occasional trips to the salon for $150 worth of nail care and hairstyling. Her nails did look nice. That day always puzzled him. He had heard her say, "Damn, I broke a nail countless times." Later that night, while Shelley was in the shower, Jerry looked through her drawers and checked the closet. Shelley had a penchant for nice clothes with outfits he had never seen before hanging there in one of the dresser drawers. He found a small bag containing panties, which puzzled him. He hadn't seen those before, but it wasn't unusual for Shelley to wear pretty outfits. And tiny undies when they went out for dinner or dancing. Jerry enjoyed seeing Shelley pose in her outfits, knowing she could turn heads. He even found himself looking forward to their Saturday night dances, admiring her beauty and what she wore underneath. Then he stumbled upon the birth control pills, which made him angry, but he managed to calm down before Shell emerged from the shower. His first instinct was to explode and confront her, but years ago, Jerry caught his girlfriend Dana kissing a guy at a party. They'd met each other's families and were thinking of getting together. When Jerry saw Dana passionately kissing the man, he reacted impulsively by smacking him. It turned out the guy was Dana's brother, who she hadn't mentioned was visiting that night as a surprise. After the embarrassing incident, she ended their relationship. Dana wouldn't speak to Jerry, ending their relationship abruptly. It was bad timing because Dana had hinted at a special night. She'd even given him protection, suggesting they'd take things further. After the confrontation, any romantic plans were ruined. It was a tough lesson for Jerry, teaching him the importance of thinking before acting. Jerry's job involved traveling to bid on fence projects for farmers, as well as designing corrals. The job was great for handling livestock. He got to meet friendly people and work outdoors. He especially enjoyed selling nearly 4 miles of fencing. The family even invited him for a delicious dinner featuring homemade cornbread with ham and black beans. Sam Martin, the ranch owner, was a rugged man who often wore faded red long johns and suspenders. His wife Doy was cheerful and welcoming, always wearing a smile. Spending the day touring the ranch on Honda ATVs, Jerry and Sam got to know each other well. They bonded over their shared love of hunting and fishing. In fact, Sam became like a father figure to Jerry, filling a void in his life. It's surprising how strong a connection can develop in just one day of conversation. Despite having a daughter about 19 years old who was incredibly attractive, even in casual attire like a flannel shirt and jeans, the couple didn't pursue a relationship. Jerry was married, so there was no way she could have anything to do with him. They called her Molly, and he couldn't stop thinking about her all the way home the next day. They seemed like really nice people, the kind you'd want to get to know better. Their ranch was mostly rolling hills with plenty of water. It had been a labor of love for Sam over the years as he built up his herds. Now he needed solid fencing and large pole barns because the outside world was encroaching on his land with newcomers. Not everyone appreciated cows and sheep roaming freely through their manicured lawns and flower gardens. There wasn't much of a choice: build fences or watch the land turn into housing. Sam went with the fences, which turned out to be a major success for him. One downside of Jerry's job was the long distances he had to travel. He often had to travel 300 to 400 miles from home. Like with this job in Idaho, he was on the road for over 350 miles. The company covered his motel stays and meals while he was on the road. The road was long, so instead of driving all the way home, Jerry usually stayed in a motel overnight and returned home the next day. This time was different, though. Sam and Doy insisted he stay the night, showing him to a spacious upstairs bedroom. It was so quiet that Jerry had trouble falling asleep, occasionally hearing the sounds of sheep or cows outside, which felt like an alarm clock each time. The night was warm, and he found himself kicking off his own covers around 10 a.m. He got up to use the bathroom and passed another slightly open bedroom door with a dim nightlight inside. Molly was lying on the bed without clothes on top of the covers, her lower half in shadow with one bare breast visible in the faint light. Jerry noticed her large patch of pubic hair in the dimness, though she seemed to be sleeping. He acknowledged her beauty, but quickly averted his gaze. His eyes felt it was a bit inappropriate to stare, so he went back to his own bed. He noticed the bedroom door was now closed. He realized he might have been caught peering in. The next morning, Sam and Doy sat him at the kitchen table, serving up piles of eggs, ham and potatoes that tasted better than any he'd had before. "We grow these right here on the farm. We have 40 acres dedicated to potatoes up on the North Range." Sam noticed that Jerry was pleased as he went for seconds. Molly then strolled in wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, looking lovely in her casual attire. She shot Jerry a mischievous glance and raised an eyebrow, which caused him to blush. Doy noticed and exchanged knowing looks with them, grinning. After breakfast, Jerry and Doy agreed that they were really welcoming people. He packed up his things, putting the contract and the generous check in his briefcase. It was time to head back home and get back to his own routine. He couldn't help but think he could live a happy life like theirs. She handed him a loaf of her homemade cornbread as he got into his truck. He thanked her, looking forward to enjoying it on the long drive back. Molly stood on the porch watching him with one hand on the railing. Jerry waved to her as he started his truck, and she waved back on the journey home. He couldn't shake thoughts of her. He tried to distract himself from the image of her lying there, but it kept coming back to him. Shelley always kept the house spotless, and whenever he returned from his short trips, she greeted him with tight hugs and affection. Those trips rarely lasted more than a night. Jerry enjoyed returning home after his travels, especially because after overnight trips, Shell seemed more eager for physical intimacy. Despite being just 28, Shelley maintained her figure well. She also worked in real estate, mainly on commission, while sometimes her earnings were even higher than Jerry's. It wasn't common, though, and in recent years, she often went through periods without making any sales. Nevertheless, they managed to make ends meet. Jerry felt it was time for a new truck, as his old Dodge Ram, though still in decent condition, was showing signs of wear and tear. He didn't worry about getting a new truck because the one he had was fully paid off. Their sex life was satisfying, happening a couple of times each week, and Shelley always seemed eager for it. Overall, Jerry felt content with their life together. There were a few things he wished were different, but he was doing his best as usual. When he returned from his trip, Shelley greeted him warmly and was ready for intimacy. They didn't waste any time getting to the bedroom, where the fresh, crisp sheets awaited them. Despite a lingering suspicion in the back of his mind, Jerry managed to enjoy the moment. He was focused on his work while he was out, but when he came back, he pushed aside his concerns. Now they resurfaced, and he didn't have any concrete evidence to support his suspicions. He needed more proof to support his suspicions. It was possible that Shell had simply gone to her appointments that day, both to the doctor and the hair salon. Perhaps the new clothes and lingerie were just a surprise for him. In fact, there were times when she would dress up for a nice dinner, spinning around to show off a new outfit or teasing him with a playful grin and a glimpse of lingerie. He could shake off that persistent suspicion. He was determined to uncover the truth. The discovery of birth control pills indicated she had deceived him. He had concerns beyond just delaying parenthood, so he took steps to investigate right under her nose without her noticing. On the night everything unraveled, Jerry drove by his house scanning for unfamiliar vehicles. None were present, but he hadn't anticipated any with neighbors nearby. The upstairs bedroom light was on, the curtains were tightly shut, and there was little evidence beyond his gut feeling and the shock of finding birth control pills stashed in her underwear drawer. Jerry felt blindsided, spotting her leaving the salon instead of. Going to her doctor's appointment had made him think there was something going on. If you think there's something fishy going on, there probably is. His mom had told him maybe 500 times that he was right. Jerry was sure there was something going on. He stood at the top of the stairs, trying to hear any noise. The only thing he could hear was the sound of the shower running. It seemed strange. It was almost 2 in the morning. He had thought he would find her either asleep or up to something secretive. This was the perfect time for her to be up to something, given that he had told her. He was away on a job in Idaho, which meant he couldn't get back until late afternoon the next day. There was a promising job in Idaho, so he closed the sale over the phone. Sam and Doy were happy with the previous work, so they didn't ask him to come back. They even invited him, but Jerry had to focus on bidding on another small job nearby. He thought about enjoying more of that delicious cornbread and maybe catching sight of Molly again, but he decided to focus on the job. He felt a bit scattered, standing at the staircase, mulling over work and a woman he barely knew with a tool in hand. He almost turned back, considering retreating from the house altogether. But he couldn't shake off the need for certainty. If Shell wasn't up to anything, he could slip back out and put it all behind him. But if she was, he wasn't sure what his next move would be. The notion that she might be having an affair lingered in his mind, even though he lacked solid evidence. He stood there, feeling foolish, for he listened intently for quite some time, but all he heard was the running shower. Shelley often spent a good 30 minutes under the water, so that wasn't out of the ordinary. He slowly pushed the door open, half expecting to find nothing inside. But there sat a man on the edge of the disheveled bed, his back turned to the door, fully clothed and engrossed in reading a magazine, Jerry's popular science magazine. Jerry's anger rose. The shower was still running as the man turned to face him. Jerry's blood began to boil. Who the hell was this? Are you Jerry? He demanded, entering the room. The man jumped to his feet and turned, his expression a mix of shock and guilt. It was Art Barnes, the man who ran the local bank that Shelley's real estate agency relied on for closing deals. Barnes was in his 50s, with gray hair at his temples. He was a commanding presence, even larger than Jerry himself. Jerry was well aware that if there were any lucrative deals going down in town, Barnes wouldn't be too far away. He also understood that, tough as he was, he'd likely take if he confronted this guy, he'd probably get a beating. Barnes stammered, noticing the tool in Jerry's grip and fear flashing in his eyes. You come into my house to mess around with my wife in my own bed, Jerry growled, his voice dripping with anger. Hey man, it's not like that, Barnes began, but Jerry cut him off, raising the tool he aimed at Barnes. The man dropped the magazine and charged forward, catching Jerry off guard. He expected Barnes to back off or cower. He could pull the trigger, but he had to get around the bed. Jerry fired, hitting Barnes in the stomach. The man winced and stopped in his tracks, his hands instinctively moving to his wound. Everything seemed to slow down. What was that? Shell's voice called out from the bathroom as the shower turned off. Barnes looked sickened, then glanced at Jerry and charged again. Jerry had never shot before in movies or on TV. You shoot someone and they fall and that's it. But despite hitting Barnes squarely, it only seemed to enrage him. He lunged forward once more, so Jerry shot him again. That did the trick. The man collapsed, groaning loudly. What was that? Shell yelled again as the bathroom door swung open. She stood there, covered in soap suds. Jerry noticed her blonde pubic hair all lathered up. Who's this guy? What the heck is he doing here? Jerry yelled at her. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, staring at Barnes on the floor. Honey, it's not what it seems, she pleaded, looking up at him. You're in there scrubbing yourself clean for this guy. No, honey, we were just talking. That's all, she whimpered at 2 a.m. in our bedroom, and you're naked. I just needed a shower. We weren't afraid. You lying traitor, he bellowed in a burst of anger. Jerry shot her too. Shelley went down just like they do in the movies, she screamed as she fell. Jerry watched her, feeling like he was in some unreal scene from a movie. Then he checked on Barnes. The guy was moaning loudly, his eyes filled with fear as he looked up at Jerry. Don't end me, Barnes screamed. You bastard, Jerry said. Barnes quieted down suddenly. Jerry felt strangely calm, like he was watching it all happen to someone else. He approached Shelley. Was it worth it? He asked. Shelley didn't respond. She just stared at him with wide eyes. Forget it, Jerry muttered. He picked up the phone from the nightstand. I found an intruder in my wife's bedroom. I hit him. My wife got hurt. Can you send an ambulance? He calmly requested. He slid the tool into his belt and went downstairs. He opened the fridge and spotted the 6-pack of beer waiting there as usual. There was a pack of beer waiting for him as usual. Shelley had done the grocery shopping. There was also an unopened bag of chips on the counter along with a can of mixed nuts. Jerry grabbed those and settled into the living room, positioning himself where he could see the bottom of the stairs. He started thinking about the job he had just done, running the numbers in his head. The tool was poking him, so he shifted. He moved it to his side to make himself more comfortable. He could hear Shelley upstairs sobbing, so he reached for the TV remote and turned it on. Some people were talking, but he couldn't make out what they were saying. The chips tasted good and fresh by his second beer and halfway through the bag of chips. He heard the sirens and thought they'd taken a long time. He grumbled to himself on the way to the police station. He was annoyed that they wouldn't let him bring his can of mixed nuts. The officer wasn't very gentle either. They spotted him sitting there eating chips and then noticed the tool in his belt. Tools were pointed at him and the mess started. One of the cops grabbed the tool and before he knew it, Jerry was face down on the floor with his arms twisted behind his back. "Ouch, you're hurting me," he complained, but received no response. One of them growled later when he asked for his can of mixed nuts. Jerry stayed quiet. The situation wasn't great. The lawyer Jerry hired told him that Jerry didn't recognize the man. He'd never needed a lawyer before. Another guy in jail with him had mentioned the lawyer firm Mercer McLaren Hanson Ireland and Phillips. He said, "I use Jack Ireland. He's a damn good lawyer." "So why are you still in here?" Jerry had asked, earning a dirty look. But Jerry needed representation, so he called the lawyer Jack Ireland was short and stout, he was carrying an old, worn-out briefcase. He looked over the charges and shook his head. "What's the next step?" Jerry asked. "We'll get you a bail hearing. We'll see if there's enough equity in your house to cover it. Then we wait for the grand jury to review the case." The lawyer explained how serious it was. "Jerry, if you're going to shoot, end them. If you don't, they'll testify against you. You're in deep trouble. I can't believe you used that little pop tool. It should have been a Magnum or something." Jerry asked how serious the injuries were. He was told that no one was giving him much information. His wife would be okay, but she had a hole in her side. Barnes was pretty messed up. He had a lot of surgery because the little bullets tend to bounce around. "Why did you shoot him a second time?" the lawyer inquired. "He was still coming at me," Jerry replied. "That seems intentional," he added. Ireland observed, giving Jerry a sidelong glance. "Good," Jerry responded, earning another snort from the lawyer. "A Magnum would have taken them clean." "All you did was poke a hole between them," Ireland remarked again. It took nearly a month before bail was set and Jerry finally walked out into the fresh air. The scent was almost surprising after being inside. He had grown accustomed to the smell. He couldn't return home. The court ordered him to stay away. The restraining order mandated a 100-yard distance, but Jerry didn't care. Shell was living there, having left the hospital long before he left jail. However, Jerry managed to beat Shelley to signing the papers. The property was titled as Shelley. Jacobson or Gerald Jacobson, either one could sign the papers. It was a small legal detail that Jerry hadn't noticed before, but he found Pleasant's approach surprising. Jerry realized that Shell had taken care of that detail, which now made sense, but it seemed she had overlooked that tiny point, probably due to being in the hospital. Jack Ireland turned out to be a decent lawyer, but he made sure to collect his fees if Shelley wanted to keep the house. There would be some hefty bills to pay. Jack Ireland had a significant claim against the property. Jerry was he was broke, but he emptied his savings to hire the lawyer. He knew the initial payment was just the beginning of the expenses, but he also knew it would anger Shelley. Still, he didn't care. His truck was still parked where he had left it, around the corner. He guessed it was more than 100 yards away, as the restraining order stipulated, but he wasn't entirely sure. The truck had accumulated a dozen parking tickets, but it hadn't been towed. Jerry casually discarded the tickets in the trash. What were they going to do, arrest him? Jerry went to see his boss at the office. The boss seemed a bit jumpy and told Jerry they had to let him go since he wasn't around and they had to hire someone else. Jerry wasn't surprised. He had already seen the news stories that night. He parked his truck in a place called South Park, finding humor in the situation. The next day, he contacted his lawyer, Jack Ireland, who arranged for a police officer to accompany him to retrieve his belongings. Maybe Ireland wasn't such a bad lawyer after all. Shelley was nowhere to be found. Jerry collected his clothes, tools, and 2 collector's items: guitars, fishing gear, and coin collections. He thought about taking the new big screen TV, but realized he had no power source in the woods. As he left, he noticed a can of mixed peanuts by his chair and grabbed it with a grin. He left the remaining beers, despite wanting to take them, due to the cops' disapproving glare on the porch. He changed the alarm code right in front of the cop, finding satisfaction in a small act of defiance at the local pawn shop. He sold the 2 guitars and most of his fishing gear, keeping only 1 pole for $1. He only had $1 to his name. He had $5,000 in cash, which he felt was all he had left. Next, he went to the post office. He and Shelley kept a box there, of course, but his key didn't work. Shell had taken him off it and had the key changed. They had his mail, though the clerk wasn't supposed to hand it over at the counter. He knew that because of the big sign, but he asked her anyway. When he saw her face light up with fear when she spotted him among the letters, he was hit by a mix of credit card applications and one from a funeral home, which felt oddly appropriate. Jerry decided to rent a new mailbox and put up his address with the court, which was considering disappearing him, but he was hesitating due to driving a conspicuous yellow Dodge. 2 weeks later, Jerry was still struggling to find a job. The news had left him feeling down for days. The newspapers painted him as a crazed and jealous husband who barged into a business meeting and started shooting. Jerry knew where that version of events came from. Art Barnes, a powerful local figure, he concluded, was behind it. The lawyer was right. If he was going to shoot someone, he might as well finish the job. Otherwise, the truth would get twisted and he'd end up with the blame back at South Park, his new residence. Jerry parked his truck in the bushes to keep it hidden. He went fishing in the nearby creek, catching some small trout, not caring about their size. What could they do? Ticket him? He cooked the fish over a fire and was cleaning up when his cell phone rang. "Hey, I need to talk to you." His former boss sounded surprisingly friendly. "Now what?" Jerry thought. "You remember that job at Sam Martin's farm in Idaho, right?" "Yeah, well, he's got a huge project. Over 10,000 acres. He's got 10,000 acres and wants more fencing, 2 pole barns and a fence all the way to the city limits. It's our biggest job yet." His excitement was palpable. Jerry was irritated. "What does that have to do with me?" It seemed like everyone was treating him poorly lately. He spent most of his time alone in the park. Martin insists. "It's you or no one." His boss explained, "I know you're interested in leaving the state, but I'm not supposed to let you." Jerry paused, then said, "What's the deal?" "I get my job back, or I get double the commissions and my job back full-time." You aren't carrying any tools, are you?" "No, I'm not allowed to have it." "The cops took mine." Jerry was irritated by that. He wasn't some trigger-happy guy who ended everyone. He only did that to 2 people. It's not like he was a maniac randomly firing at anything that annoyed him. But the newspaper sure made it seem that way. "I also want to discuss my back pay. I don't think it was fair that I was fired without being given the chance to explain. In fact, it's been months now, half of it. Plus, I haven't been paid my benefits." Jerry knew he'd been the company's top salesman. He was the one who hesitated. He could almost hear the calculations in his head. He knew it was only about 50 cents profit per foot, but with 10,000 acres, that's miles of fencing and pole bars. One of them is 100 by 60. "Wow, all right, deal." His boss said Jerry had gone down to the small corner store and treated himself to a can of mixed nuts to celebrate. He also grabbed a bottle of beer, even though he wasn't supposed to drink, but he didn't care. He drank it quickly and buried the bottle. The stern old judge looked at Jerry and his lawyer with a critical eye. However, he allowed Jerry to cross state lines for work on the condition that he returned home every night. "Mr. Jacobson, you're facing some very serious charges here." "They're very serious, but I can't deny a man the right to work until this case is heard. So don't mess this up, or I'll throw you back in jail," the judge warned him. "Yes, Your Honor," Jerry replied, keeping a straight face. The next day, he headed to Idaho. Old Man Martin greeted him warmly with a smile and a handshake. It seemed like the news hadn't reached this far yet, so Jerry saw no need to bring it up. "We're planting corn in that small patch near the creek. It's good soil. We've got some land that needs to be fenced off to keep the sheep in, and as for the Angus, we used to let them roam free, but there's a big development coming in and I'm tired of the complaints. We want to keep them on our own land, all right," Martin explained. Jerry realized that this tough old man must be pretty wealthy. By the time they returned to the ranch house, it was almost 8. It was 8 p.m. It was 8 p.m. Jerry knew he had to leave to get back to Oregon before midnight. He was sad to turn down dinner and the chance to see Molly again, but he had to go. So he left. Once back in Oregon, he checked in but got a recording. He tried again as soon as the bail office opened. "You don't have to call in every single day. Just stick to the rules," the person on the other end told him. He replied that he was fine. He realized that nobody bothers checking on things unless something grabs their attention. He got back into his truck and headed back to the Martin farm, driving at the speed limit the whole way. As soon as he pulled up, he spotted Molly sitting on the porch. She quickly ran inside and returned with a big floppy hat and a basket. She was wearing cut-off blue jeans and a t-shirt. From the way she was moving, it was clear she hadn't worn a bra. "Let's go," she said, climbing into the truck. "Where to?" he asked. "Dad wants me to show you the section by the development so you can take measurements. Everyone's busy shearing sheep today," she explained. "Shearing," he said. "Yeah, the sheep," she replied. "They'll be occupied until dark." "It took them over an hour to reach the designated area," she said. Cattle roamed around, paying little attention to them as they traveled. They chatted about various topics, and he occasionally glanced at her, noticing how her breasts bounced softly over the bumps in the road. They drove across open fields with no sign of a road, just occasional strips resembling ATV trails. He realized it had been a long time since he'd been with a woman, but he pushed those thoughts aside. This job was important, and he didn't want to upset her family. Jerry stopped the truck at the top of a rise, and below was a sizable river with a row of 3. There were some apartment buildings about half a mile away, which seemed odd in the middle of nowhere on the other side of the river. He also noticed a highway with cars zooming past at high speed, which he thought was an example of progress. Jerry could see that despite range laws, having cattle near the buildings was a problem. The fence needs to be 50 feet from those buildings all the way down to the city limits. They were fortunate because they owned the riverbank on both sides. Jerry switched to 4, he put the car in 4-wheel drive and crossed the stream. Then he drove along the fence line, using his odometer to measure the distance back at the main house. He sat down and did some calculations. It was clear the job would require their entire crew to complete it in several weeks. Once he finished, he looked up at Molly. She was sitting in a chair, her legs crossed, swinging one foot back and forth, with her shoe dangling from her toes. Everyone was busy down at the lower barn. They wouldn't be back for hours. "Do you want to come upstairs?" she asked, grinning. Jerry felt a bit embarrassed by her directness. But he knew he couldn't. I'm still married, even though we're separated. Besides, I barely know you," he explained. "Oh, I see. You're not wearing a ring. Are you planning to get a divorce?" she inquired. "Yeah, probably. I'm pretty certain," Jerry replied. So, what went wrong? Is there something wrong with your marriage? Molly asked. I shot her, he confessed. You what? Molly's eyebrows shot up. She was with a guy. I'm in your house. I'm in your bedroom, Jerry explained. Wow, I guess I can't blame you. Did you end them? Molly asked. No, Jerry replied. Fine, I suppose. Any problems, though? Yes, Jerry shared everything with her and Molly just listened. So you had to leave suddenly last night to go back to Oregon. Is that something you need to do every night? Yes, until the court case is over, then I might end up in jail, maybe not. Let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. Can I join you in Oregon? I'm not scared of you and you seem nice. Maybe you're the one for me, but I'm not sure yet. I'm tired of living way out here in the middle of nowhere. Don't get me wrong, I love this place, it's my home. But the only men here are either too old or married. I feel lonely sometimes because I'm either too old or married. What about your parents? Would they be okay if you just said yes? Jerry actually encouraged me to go after you, saying you seemed like a good catch. Humes never said that before he met a guy I dated once, who said he wasn't worth it. I guess you didn't mention having a girlfriend or Dad wouldn't have suggested it. He's pretty traditional. She smiled at that. This is all a bit sudden. Jerry said, Jerry, I've been with someone before, just one guy. We both grew up here, so we knew about that stuff and tried it, but I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded and I'd like to be with you if we decide to be together permanently. I'll be faithful, okay? You don't have to worry about that. I know what you might do. She laughed lightly at that. Jerry quickly decided on his response. How do we explain this to your father? He began, oh, come on. Molly stood up, took his hand and led him towards the lower barn. A dozen men were tending to the sheep there. Mr. Martin noticed them holding hands, smiled and nodded. Jerry and I are heading out. We'll be back tomorrow morning, he said. Okay, all right, dear, enjoy yourselves, she replied. Jerry returned to his work, taken aback but with a grin on his face. Molly explained, my parents are farmers. They understand closeness, it's a natural thing for everyone. Jerry was at a loss for words. He'd never met a woman like her before. She clearly wanted to be with him and saw nothing wrong in being upfront about it. Jerry managed to keep within the speed limit to his motel except for one part of the road. It was difficult to do with Molly beside him, keeping him aroused nearly the entire way. They had just hit the highway when she pulled off her t-shirt. Jerry was right. She was stunning. He thought about pulling over, but Molly stopped him. Let's wait until we get to a bed, she said with a smile, reaching over and running her hand up the front of his pants. Eventually, he asked her to put her shirt back on because even with the turbo and his powerful diesel V8, he couldn't shake the trucker who had noticed her driving at 95 miles per hour in a big truck. Is a large truck dangerous after all? He said. The driver of the truck strained to as he looked out of the window. He saw that they had overtaken him at about 70 miles per hour. Yeah, I know, she laughed, continuing what she was doing without stopping. Let's give him something to look at. She sat up straighter and rolled her shoulders back. Then she made a face at the man and stuck out her tongue. Jesus, Jerry muttered quietly. She stopped just in time. He was almost overwhelmed after being followed for several miles. Finally, he insisted she cover herself up to prevent an accident, which he thankfully did. 5 miles later, her shirt was off again. She did put her t-shirt back on, though. He put his shirt back on to enter the hotel room, but it came off as soon as they closed the door. Jerry was used to making love with his wife Shelley, who was always ready and willing. This was different. Molly was not just eager, she was aggressive. She climbed on top of him and they started before he could even fully undress. They spent most of the night just getting to know each other physically. What did he say? Jerry asked Molly the next morning around 11. She had called her dad to tell him they weren't coming back. That day, he just laughed. She replied, getting back onto their makeshift bed by evening. Jerry had fallen for her. He knew almost nothing about her, but didn't care. He was smitten at dinner in a small local diner. He openly confessed his feelings, so it was just as for good. He said, "Yes, I want you to be mine." "Wow, I thought you just wanted to have fun," my dad said. He said, "I saw you as good breeding material." That's just his way of life. Jerry was taken aback. Molly chuckled. "You're awesome," she said. "But where would we live?" "I don't know," Jerry replied. He was genuinely unsure. "You've got a job and a truck, which is a start. Let's see how things develop. If I commit to you, it'll be forever." "Molly, I'm falling for you," he confessed. "Don't fall for me just yet. I enjoy being with you." "But I'm still not sure," she replied, with a hint of seriousness in her voice. "Okay," he said, his face showing disappointment. "Take it easy, Jerry. For now, you're the only one for me. And if I decide this isn't what I want, then that's the end." "Okay," she reassured him. "Okay, great. We're clear," she said with a sigh of relief. "Let's head back to the motel." She smiled. By the next afternoon, Jerry had completed the bids and contracts. He sat down with Sam Martin and his wife. Molly appeared with 2 suitcases. The couple looked up at her in surprise, then turned their gaze to Jerry. "I'm leaving with Jerry," she announced for the first time. Jerry saw Doyce's smile fade, though she quickly recovered. Sam stood up and walked over. He gave her a hug, then turned to Jerry with a more serious tone than before. "You've got a lot to figure out," he said, making it clear he knew more than he had previously shown. Jerry nodded. "Molly isn't going anywhere," Sam declared. "Sam," Molly interjected, "I like Jerry well enough and I think he's a decent man, but he needs to sort himself out. He's still married and you two are nowhere near ready to start a life together." Jerry realized the man was right. He noticed Molly's shoulders droop. She was young and she was spontaneous and couldn't really challenge such a strong figure that afternoon. He shook hands with everyone and gave Molly the long hug. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised her. "It's okay, Jerry. I'll wait for you." "I need to figure things out," she said with a small tear in her eye as he got into his truck. The drive back felt endless. Jerry didn't want to leave. He knew where he truly wanted to be. Court cases take a long time, and there were periods when Jerry nearly forgot about his legal troubles. His job kept him busy. On weekends, he drove a long distance to see Molly. Both Sam and Doy welcomed him warmly, not minding when he and Molly went to her room at night. After a few weeks, he felt almost like part of the family. He even put on some weight, thanks to the way Doy cooked. Every meal was a feast and all of it was delicious. He found out that Molly was also an excellent cook, just like her mother. She was also skilled at ranch work. One day, he watched as she managed a large injured calf that was resisting capture. Jerry grabbed the calf's tail, which only resulted in him being dragged across the field, much to Molly's amusement. However, his effort slowed the calf down enough for Molly to catch it. She grabbed its front foot, leaned into it with her shoulder, and brought it down, landing on top of it. She quickly tied the calf's hind feet with a string she had ready. The calf settled down, though its mother charged over, ready to attack. Jerry would have run, but Molly stood her ground, so he stayed. Molly handed him a flimsy stick and for a moment. Jerry had no idea what he was supposed to do with it. The cow lowered its head and snorted, kicking up dirt with its front hooves. Molly used her stick to tap the cow's face, making it stop as it didn't know how to react. When the cow turned away from her and toward Jerry, he did the same. They managed to drive the cow away and shut the gate, then returned to the large calf. Molly treated a cut on the calf's rear, probably caused by wire, and applied ointment from her ATV's back compartment. Afterwards, she let the calf go. It stood still, head low with saliva dripping, opening the gate. The cow quickly ran to the calf, which started nursing right away. "There, it will be fine now," she said with a smile. "That cow wanted to destroy me." "Yep," Jerry said, "but it was just protecting its baby." "Cows are simple to manage," she said, smiling again. "They're pretty dumb. It's the sheep that are the real trouble." "I've noticed that too," Jerry said. A lead sheep would scrutinize a small gap in the fence, then widen it until it was big enough. The sheep quickly followed the lead sheep through the narrow opening. I was helping to move a flock into a corral at the time. There was a chute leading to the barn for shearing. Once the sheep were inside, I latched the gate. I had only walked a few steps when a large dog inspected the latch, opened it, and headbutted the gate, letting the whole flock back out into the field. This caused a bit of chaos. 2 small border collies ran out, circled the flock, and lay down staring them down. The sheep stopped. And they all stared back until one looked away, then they all turned and went back into the pen. Molly walked over, flipped the gate latch, then secured it with a chain latch and set the catch. "They really know how to handle gates." She laughed. Jerry glanced at the 2 dogs and could almost believe they were giving him disapproving looks for several more weeks. That's how it went. He drove the long distance to the large ranch and got involved in daily tasks. Sam and Doy kept a close eye on him, and he noticed, but he enjoyed it. While he almost forgot about his usual life, immersing himself in a new lifestyle, reality always returned when he unlocked his small apartment back in town. One day, the phone rang. Jerry was surprised to hear Shelley's voice, since they hadn't been in touch at all. "How are you?" she asked. She said, "I just wanted to thank you for not making a big deal about the alimony." Jerry just grunted. She added, with a hint of disbelief, "I forgive you. I know you were upset and didn't mean to hurt me." "You've got to be joking." "No, I'm serious. I still love you. I always have. I was thinking maybe if you're up for it, we could go out and have a nice dinner and talk." Jerry recognized that tone in her voice. He knew all too well what she was talking about. "That's not a good idea," he finally said after a long pause. "Sure it is. We could have a nice evening out like old times and maybe have some fun like before. I'll wear one of those outfits. You really liked it, maybe even without underwear. How about that?" She purred, "I miss you even if you're not as big as Art." The last comment provoked him, and it worked. "Shelley, you cheated on me. There's no way in hell I'm going out with you." Jerry shouted, "Oh come on, I'm trying. I told you I forgave you for what happened. I know you didn't mean it. I wish I had actually ended you in that damn Barnes. You forgive me. You're unbelievable." Jerry lost his temper and yelled into the phone. "Phone calls can reach places you can't even touch, honey," she said nastily, and then the line went completely silent. Jerry fumed. "I might just come over there and finish the job," he shouted, and he heard a faint giggle in the background before the phone cut off. Now what the heck was that all about, he thought, still seething. There were 3 of them, all big, and they handcuffed him, and once again Jerry found himself in a jail cell. That was pretty dumb, he thought. "Why did you threaten her?" his lawyer asked as soon as he walked in. "I didn't really," she replied. "She called me to say she forgave me for crying out loud. The woman was cheating on me. She must be crazy. Well, they have you on tape threatening her in Barnes, which breaks the restraining order," his lawyer explained. "But she called me." He argued, "That's not how they see it. They mean that guy was there too." Jerry sighed. He realized what had happened. The lawyer then played a short recording. All it captured was Jerry yelling right after Shelley sweetly asked him to dinner. "That's been tampered with," he told the lawyer, feeling a sense of dread that this still looks really bad. The lawyer responded that the stern old judge stared at Jerry, then shook his head in court. They only played the part of the tape where Shelley sounded pleasant, like she was trying to make peace. Jerry listened to his own voice screaming in rage and knew he sounded unhinged. "This man is too dangerous to be free," the prosecutor declared. It's clear this was an attempt to provoke my client, H.E.K. The real victim here is his wife, who cheated on him with Mr. Barnes, and it's all been written up. They're just trying to get back at him. Jerry's lawyer said your client was the one making threats. The judge said there's no proof of the affair. Jerry ended up back in his jail cell. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into a month. His lawyer visited several times to provide updates. Then one day a young woman came with him. She introduced herself as Carrie Anderson, also a lawyer. I don't think I can afford another lawyer. Jerry began already accepting that he might. Don't worry, it's all taken care of. You have some friends who are helping out. I'm taking over your case, and we have a whole team ready to support you. She replied with a smile. Jerry was puzzled. Yes, Sam Martin and his wife. She said, still smiling. They left you a message too. They thought you'd understand. What is it? Sway outside the authorities were quick to act. They had solid evidence that the tape had been tampered with. A check of Jerry's phone revealed that the incriminating call had come from Art Barnes's office phone within just 3 days. Jerry was released on bail. The first thing he did was he did the sensible thing and picked up his truck and drove to Idaho. Molly nearly bowled him over with a hug when she saw him. Sam and Doy watched from the porch, smiling broadly. I really want to thank you both, he said, but why did you do this for me? We didn't, Sam said. We did it for Molly. That evening, Jerry finally told them everything in detail for the first time. He hadn't shared it all before, though he had told Molly they already knew most of the story. Once again, Jerry felt almost at peace that night. He lay in bed with Molly, cuddled up as close as possible. Something was different, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what. I'm ready, she whispered. Jerry smiled broadly, feeling accepted. Molly was his forever. A month later, the trial day arrived with a different judge. The trial proceeded as Jerry had anticipated. Both Barr and Shell claimed that they were having a normal business meeting and that Shelley had taken a break to use her private bathroom. They alleged that Jerry had barged in and started shooting. However, Jerry's legal team pointed out the inconsistency, noting that it was 2 a.m. The meeting was said to have taken place in her bedroom. The prosecution presented a large chart showing their version of events, which depicted Barnes sitting on the bed reading when Jerry supposedly barged in. Jerry's lawyers challenged this, suggesting that it was unlikely that Jerry could have barged in and started shooting if Barnes was seated. They pointed out that Barnes must have stood and approached Jerry, given that Jerry was in his own bedroom and being approached aggressively by the much larger Mr. Barnes. In self-defense, Jerry acted. The defense said Jerry had no way of knowing that Barnes was there. He could have been a burglar or even worse. Jerry was simply protecting his home. The jurors exchanged looks. Shelley was called again to testify. She continued to deny any affair. Photos were then shown depicting her and Art Barnes in compromising positions. Jerry was aware of these photos. They were taken well after both had been. Jerry remembered that Barnes had been hurt in the groin, but the photos showed he'd recovered well. Shelley was shocked by the photos, which seemed to show the work of a skilled private detective. They surprised a few people in the courtroom when they were displayed on a large screen. It was clear from the photos that Shelley had lied and Art Barnes was definitely not bigger than he was. The prosecution objected to the explicitness of the photos, but it was too late. Everyone had already seen them, and there was a gasp as people turned towards a disturbance. Art Barnes's wife had stood up and yelled, "You son of a bitch!" She stormed out, leaving Barnes looking utterly miserable. Jerry looked at Carrie Anderson, his lawyer, who remained expressionless. Overruled, the judge dismissed the prosecution's ongoing objections. The next set of photos showed the crime scene taken by the police. The messy bed and a magazine on the far side were clearly visible, as was Shelley naked. The images were uncensored. Jerry looked over at Shelley, who was sitting to the side with her head down and her face red with embarrassment. During a break in the lobby, Carrie mentioned that the case would be closed if not for one issue. What's that? Jerry asked. You shot your wife. As for Barnes, it was defensible, but what did you do to your? We could argue that the killing was excessive and that it was a momentary rage. We might be able to get some jury sympathy. It's too late for a temporary insanity defense. The judge won't accept it. What if I just tell the truth? Jerry suggested we could try that. What would you say? She made me really angry. He stated plainly that would likely lead to a conviction. Assault with a deadly weapon, yes, I understand, but it's the truth. He responded. Carrie sighed, then nodded. When it came time for the verdict, the judge asked the jury foreman how they found the defendant on the charge of attempted murder. He said not guilty. On the charge of assault, the man said guilty. The courtroom went silent. The room was completely silent. Jerry noticed that neither Art Barnes nor Shelley were present. The judge shuffled some papers and said, "What a mess." Jerry was instructed to stand. He was told, "You can't just shoot people, no matter how angry you get." The judge said this, shaking his head. Carrie had warned that this judge liked to talk during sentencing, so Jerry just waited. At least he didn't kill. Anything else, he added, glancing around, which made some of the people in the room laugh. The judge banged his gavel, then almost smiled, but stopped himself. Lies, cheating, violence, revenge plots, my word, the things people do, he commented. He then looked at Jerry. 5 years, he announced. Suspended probation, time served. Now get out of here, he added. The judge left the courtroom without looking back. Jerry gave Carrie a hug and then looked over at Molly in the audience, who was smiling and crying. The sun was shining as Jerry walked out of the courthouse holding Molly's hand. There was hardly any disagreement during the final meeting about his divorce, which happened just a few days later. Shelley's lawyer was there, but Shelley wasn't. They decided not to pursue alimony because it turned out Shelley was now earning more than Jerry. It's difficult to earn much while you're in jail. Jerry walked out into the sunshine after that meeting was over. Jerry's big Dodge diesel hummed as they traveled down the nearly deserted highway toward Idaho. Molly reclined in her seat. She was sitting in her seat, her blouse undone, enjoying the sun on her skin. We were about to pass a truck. Jerry cautioned her, "I don't mind, let him look. It doesn't bother you, right? The sun feels nice." Jerry just chuckled, signaled, and overtook the slow-moving truck on a steep incline. He doubted the driver would even notice. "Hey, what do you think about us getting married, honey?" Once they were back in the right lane, she asked, "I'm all for it." "Do you want to?" "Yes, I really do. Plus, you kind of have to." "I have to." "Why didn't we use protection?" She smiled. "We never have." "What does that have to do with?" "Remember that night at the house when I said I was ready?" "Oh, that's what you meant. I thought you meant ready for us to be together." "I was," she said, grinning. He teased her, saying, "My dad owns a gun." She laughed, saying, "He won't need it." Jerry replied with a grin, saying, the sun was still shining when they arrived at the large ranch house, high on the hill, above a bull that was mating with a cow, which seemed quite fitting to them. "I want to go down by the creek," Molly said. "Why?" Jerry asked. "So I can welcome you home," she replied. She replied with a smile. Sam and Doy stepped outside as they got out of the truck. Molly waved at them, then grabbed Jerry's hand as she led him down the hill toward the creek. He looked back to see Sam and Doy laughing and holding hands as they returned inside on the grassy bank by the creek. Molly took off her clothes. "Hurry up," she urged him, and then he helped him undress quickly. He started to embrace her, but she pulled him down to kneel face to face with her, both of them naked and holding hands. They knew exactly what to do. They stared into each other's eyes for a long time, then she leaned into him. They came together slowly to the sound of birds singing and the gentle flow of the creek. Afterwards, as they lay in each other's arms, they relaxed in each other's arms, enjoying the peaceful setting. The distant bull bellowed loudly, and Jerry threw his head back and mimicked the sound, which sent Molly into fits of laughter. "You need to work on that," she giggled. "What about the other part?" he smiled. "You're great at that, honey." Laughing, they dressed and walked back to the house for the first time. Jerry felt truly at home.